After 12 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. A Human Rights Watch has reported that authorities in Zimbabwe have intensified a crackdown on critics, opposing a proposed constitutional amendment that could extend President Emmerson Mnangagwa's time in office. The ruling ZANUPF party is pushing changes that would lengthen presidential and parliamentary terms from 5 to 7 years, potentially delaying the next national election from 2028 to 2030. Our Human Rights Watch says that activists, lawyers and civil society groups challenging the proposal have faced intimidation, assaults and police interference. Idriss Ali Nassah is a senior Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch, and he now joins us on the line. Idriss, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon and thank you for having me.
Now, your report highlights growing pressure on critics of the proposed constitutional amendment in Zimbabwe. Based on your findings on the ground, what patterns of intimidation or repression have you documented so far?
Well, I mean, it's firstly important to let people know that what we're witnessing right now is a continuation of this pattern of repression and crackdown on legitimate opposition and lawful activism by the regime of President Emmerson Mnangagwa since it came into power in 2017. So since that period of time, there's been a rise in abductions, in arbitrary detentions, in the weaponization of the law against critics of governments. We've seen the enactment of very abusive laws, the use of the criminal justice system to target and denigrate opponents. So right now there is that pattern, a continuation of that pattern, where those that are opposed to constitutional amendment number 3 are being subjected to arbitrary arrests, detentions. We are having those that are speaking against that, living in fear, being attacked.
And just what kind of assaults or harassment have individuals and civil society groups opposing this amendment? What have they experienced, and who are the alleged perpetrators in these incidents?
I mean, they've experienced quite sustained, systematic, structured attacks. I'll give you a few examples. In October last year, that was on the 28th of October 2025, on the eve of civil society organizations hosting a conversation, a dialogue around this proposed constitutional amendment, the offices of the Southern Africa Political Economy Series, is called Subtrust, where the venue of this dialogue was to happen. The offices on that eve of that dialogue, the offices were bombed in a suspected arson attack by people yet to be arrested or identified. On that same day, I think a day after that, in Bulawayo, the second largest city in Harare of Zimbabwe, also police shut down another proposed dialogue where civil society groups were coming together, to discuss this constitutional amendment. And of recent, on the 1st of March, a prominent lawyer, constitutional lawyer, and leader of the National Constitutional Assembly, Professor Lavo Maduku, was attacked by men who firstly identified themselves as police officers, who forced their way into a meeting he was having with members of his organization, severely beat up several members of that organization. They fired a shotgun. They beat up, Lavo Maduku and left him, for dead. He actually ended up with severe injuries in a hospital. And again, this has happened to an organization called the Constitutional Defenders Forum, led by another constitutional lawyer, Tendai Biti. The organization was to launch itself, I think, on the 28th of February, and the police refused permission for this organization to meet and have discussions around the constitutional amendment. A few days later, the police laid siege on the offices of Tendai Biti in Harare. Heavily armed officers in vehicles went to Tendai Biti's office and laid siege on it and assaulted people in that office. So what we are witnessing is really a sustained bludgeoning of the people, especially those that are at the forefront of opposing or at least having conversations around the proposed amendments to the Constitution. Clearly, the authorities in Zimbabwe do not want alternative voices to be heard. They do not want people to meet and mobilize and discuss alternative thoughts to these amendments.
And the Zimbabwe authorities have denied any involvement in some of the reported attacks. And what response have you seen from government and security forces when these allegations are raised? And just to point out, to highlight the word some. So are they taking responsibility for others? What exactly are they saying?
The response has been quite interesting, especially from the police. The Zimbabwe Republic Police, for example, a few days ago did admit that they went and laid siege on the offices of Tendai Biti, ostensibly to maintain law and order. So they did admit that they deployed heavily armed officers to Tendai Biti's office. What they did not say was that they went into the offices and assaulted, some innocent people at the offices. In the case of the assault on Professor Lumumba Duku, the police said they are still investigating. They've not expressly dissociated themselves from that assault. What is interesting in the Zimbabwean case is that the police are notoriously slow in investigating and bringing to account those that are responsible for violating the rights of the opposition, of civil society, of journalists. So, I'll give an example. In September last year, the home of a prominent opposition leader, Joe was petrol bombed. To this day, nobody has been arrested. The investigation has gone cold. So what that does in the Zimbabwean context is that it emboldens the perpetrators. The culture of impunity emboldens the perpetrators and disempowers in many ways the victims. So the authorities have not really investigated. The authorities have not really brought those that are suspected of violating these rights to account. And it's quite unfortunate.
Now, from a human rights perspective, how concerning is the current climate for freedom of expression and assembly in Zimbabwe? And, if the intimidation and repression reported in your findings continue to escalate, what's the worst case scenario for the country's democratic processes and just civil society ahead of ahead of the next elections, rather?
It's quite unfortunate that authorities in Zimbabwe have really not shown any commitment to the tenets of democratic rule. As Human Rights Watch, what we are saying is that Zimbabwean leaders, they should demonstrate their commitment to the rule of law by respecting the country's constitution and international human rights obligations for freedoms of expression, for freedoms of assembly. We are saying that civil society, opposition, politicians, legal experts, and even ordinary people should be allowed to peacefully express their views without fear of being bludgeoned or arrested for simply holding an alternative view.
Well, Idriss, we have run out of time and are going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you for your time on Africa Update.
Thank you very much.
That's Idriss Ali Nassah, a senior Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch, joining us on the line. It is 19 after 12 Central African Time.
When it comes to world-class exhibitions,